Could you state your name?
Tyler James Robinson.
Robinson, I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I am able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence.
Charlie Kirk's accused killer, Tyler Robinson, finally appeared in court, but what was supposed to be a routine hearing turned into absolute chaos. Moments after hearing the charges, Robinson lost control, shouting at the judge and lunging toward prosecutors before being restrained. But what he said while being dragged out shocked everyone. Let's get into it. The moment Tyler Robinson snapped in court, the courtroom went dead silent, then exploded in chaos. Tyler Robinson, the man accused of murdering conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, suddenly lunged from behind the defendant's table, shouting something that made even the judge freeze. Deputies scrambled, papers flew. One officer yelled, "Get him down!" as Robinson's hand grazed the prosecutor's jacket before he was wrestled to the floor. And that's when the shouting began, not from the crowd, but from Robinson himself. He screamed about the system, about revenge, and about truth being buried alive. It wasn't just a courtroom outburst, it was a full-blown breakdown from a man once hailed as a straight-A college student turned national villain, and what came next would shock everyone watching across America. This is the story of how the killer of Charlie Kirk, Tyler James Robinson, lost control in court, exposing a disturbing pattern of manipulation, political obsession, and guilt that may have driven one of the most shocking assassinations in modern political history. When Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, stepped onto the stage at Utah Valley University on September 10th, 2025, the crowd was electric. It was part of his American Comeback Tour, the first of 15 stops that week.
Charlie Kirk arrives for Turning Point USA's event, the American Comeback Tour. It's the first of a 15-stop tour of colleges, something Charlie Kirk has become famous for.
By noon, over 3,000 people had gathered under a white tent. Kirk joked about Utah's crowd size, smiled, and, as always, challenged students to bring the best libs that Utah has to offer.
Bring the best libs that Utah has to offer.
And then, just minutes later, it happened. A single gunshot, one shot to the neck, panic, screams, blood. As eyewitnesses described it, you just hear the gunshot and you just see his neck just open up. It was horrible. Police scanners crackled, paramedics shouted orders, and the entire nation watched in disbelief as video from Utah Valley University hit social media within minutes. Charlie Kirk, the polarizing conservative voice who built an empire out of campus debates, was dead at 31. The FBI moved in almost immediately. Within 16 minutes, agents joined local law enforcement to lock down the area. Witnesses described the shooter, a man in jeans, black shirt, black mask, carrying a long rifle.
He's wearing jeans, black shirt, black mask, long rifle.
Then came the first mistake and the first viral moment. An older, bald man, handcuffed on the ground, was mistakenly identified as the shooter. That image spread across X and Facebook like wildfire, fueling conspiracy theories and online rage. But as it turned out, the man wasn't a hero or a scapegoat, he was something far worse. Authorities later confirmed that 71-year-old George Zinn, who yelled, "I shot him, now shoot me," to police, had falsely confessed, not to protect the killer, but to feed his own twisted delusions. Investigators discovered over 20 images of minors, ages 5 to 12, on his phone. The Utah County Sheriff said Zinn admitted he derived gratification from those photos. He wasn't a shooter, he was a predator, and while officers wasted time detaining him, the real gunman was already gone. That gunman, Tyler James Robinson, would later be found hiding in southern Utah 33 hours after the assassination. According to NewsNation Prime, he had confessed to his father, who, in a shocking twist, helped turn him in.
Suspected shooter Tyler Robinson is in custody, arrested at 10 p.m. the previous night in southern Utah, after an alleged confession to his father, who helped turn him in.
President Trump himself confirmed the arrest the next morning, posting,
"I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody, right? In custody. Everyone did a great job."
But if the shooting itself tore the country apart, the courtroom spectacle that followed weeks later made it worse. When Tyler Robinson was first brought before a Utah County judge, he appeared calm, even detached. Wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, he stood quietly as Judge Michael Skouras read out the charges. Aggravated murder, a capital felony, felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of witness tampering, violent offense committed in the presence of a child. Each charge carried carried heavy sentencing implications, including the death penalty. When the prosecutor finished reading, the courtroom fell silent. But Robinson's calm shattered the moment the judge mentioned victim targeting, that he allegedly chose Charlie Kirk because of his political beliefs. Robinson began mumbling under his breath, rocking slightly. The bailiffs tightened their stance, and then, in one violent flash, he tried to leap toward the prosecution table. What followed was pure bedlam. Deputies tackled him as gasps filled the courtroom. The judge called for order, pounding his gavel, but the chaos wouldn't stop. Robinson shouted that the trial was a setup, that they made me do it, and that Charlie deserved it. It was the kind of outburst you'd expect from a conspiracy theorist cornered by his own lies, a meltdown that instantly went viral. To many Americans, it was the first real glimpse of the man behind the crime, and it wasn't what they expected. Robinson wasn't some hardened extremist or political mercenary. He was a 24-year-old college dropout from Ogden, Utah, with a history of online radicalization. FBI analysts later revealed he had spent months posting in fringe online groups, venting about saving America from tyranny and accusing conservative figures like Charlie Kirk of betraying the youth movement. It was ideological hatred cloaked as activism, and it had metastasized into murder. Utah's governor, Spencer Cox, later admitted how deeply the case rattled him.
For 33 hours, I was praying that if this had to happen here, that it wouldn't be one of us. Sadly, that prayer was not answered the way I had hoped for.
His words cut through the noise because Tyler Robinson was one of them, a Utah native, a local student, a man whose anger had been simmering for years under the surface. By the time Robinson's next court date rolled around, the world had seen the clips, the transcripts, and the outburst replayed across every news network. But the most disturbing part wasn't his aggression, it was what came after. Whispers spread that Robinson had tried to attack a guard while being transferred back to county jail that night. Others claimed he had scrawled "Justice for Freedom" on his cell wall using toothpaste and water. None of it made sense, but that's the thing about obsession. It doesn't have to. Inside the mind of Charlie Kirk's killer. When the cell door slammed shut behind Tyler Robinson, it echoed like the closing of a chapter in American politics. But in truth, it was only the beginning. From the outside, it seemed like justice had finally been served. The killer was caught. The headlines had faded. Charlie Kirk's supporters were holding vigils and launching scholarship funds in his name. But inside the Utah County Jail, something darker was unfolding. A slow, eerie descent that would later make even the court officers question whether Robinson's violent courtroom outburst had been spontaneous or carefully rehearsed. Jail logs show that Robinson's first 48 hours in custody were chaotic. He refused food, ignored questions, and spent hours pacing back and forth, murmuring under his breath. Correctional officers wrote in their reports that he was unusually calm, almost unnaturally so, alternating between long stretches of silence and sudden fits of laughter that echoed down the concrete hallway. The next morning, an officer found him standing perfectly still, facing the corner of his cell. On the wall, written with toothpaste, were the words, "I served God's purpose." When asked about it later, Robinson reportedly told an investigator, "You think I shot Charlie Kirk? No, I delivered him." Those words sent chills through the entire department. It wasn't just defiance, it was delusion rooted in twisted conviction. Within a week, prosecutors would quietly order a psychiatric evaluation, citing signs of psychotic ideation linked to extremist conditioning, but the results wouldn't arrive until much later. For now, Robinson was just another high-profile inmate, isolated and angry, monitored 24/7 under suicide watch. Meanwhile, news channels continued dissecting every detail of the case. News Nation Prime aired new footage showing Robinson's confession to his father, the very act that ended the 33-hour manhunt.
Suspected shooter Tyler Robinson is in custody, arrested at 10 p.m. the previous night in southern Utah, after an alleged confession to his father, who helped turn him in.
That moment, a father turning in his son, became one of the most haunting symbols of the tragedy. Interviews later revealed that the father, a former pastor, had driven Tyler to an isolated rest stop near Cedar City. Sitting in the passenger seat, Tyler reportedly whispered, "I did it, Dad. I had to do it. He was leading them astray." The father didn't speak. He simply dialed 911. By the time authorities arrived, Tyler was sobbing, but those tears didn't last long. The next morning, as he was escorted to booking, he smiled for the camera, that eerie mugshot with the faintest smirk at the corner of his lips. clips would go on to circulate online, dissected, mocked, and studied like a Rorschach test of modern extremism. Inside his cell, however, Robinson was unraveling. Officers noted his increasingly erratic sleep patterns, pacing for hours at night, scratching at the walls, and whispering sermons to an invisible congregation. "Charlie talks to me," he told a jail psychiatrist. "He says I did what others wouldn't." When the psychologist asked him who others referred to, Robinson smiled and said, "The ones afraid of losing followers." Those statements were later included in pre-trial documents filed by the defense, arguing that Robinson suffered from a severe dissociative delusion linked to online indoctrination. But prosecutors weren't convinced. They saw strategy, not sickness. Every statement, every moment of madness, they believed, was part of a performance designed to paint him as insane and avoid the death penalty. And as it turned out, Robinson's behavior began to support that theory. In late September, just days before his next court appearance, guards discovered a handwritten letter addressed to someone named E.M. Inside the envelope was a rambling, cryptic message that read, "They think I lost, but the war hasn't even begun. They will all see the truth soon. Don't believe the footage. It's not real. They replaced him. Watch the lights flicker before you sleep." Investigators traced E.M. to a known online associate, a radical forum user who frequently shared anti-establishment manifestos and videos claiming the US government had staged conservative martyrdoms. The letter was flagged, copied, and forwarded to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and it wasn't the last one. Within days, Robinson had written 7 more letters, each more paranoid and violent than the last. In one, he declared, "If they silence me, you must finish it. One shot isn't enough. It's not murder, it's correction." Those letters would later become the backbone of the prosecution's argument that Robinson was not insane, but calculating, a man staging his own psychosis to look like a victim. The public wouldn't know any of this until later. What they did see, however, was what happened during Robinson's second hearing on September 29th, the one that finally made national headlines under the phrase, "goes crazy in court." That morning, the courtroom was packed. Cameras from every major network lined the back wall. Security was doubled. Even the judge had privately requested additional officers stationed near the bench. Everyone knew Robinson had a temper. No one, however, expected what would happen next. As the hearing began, the judge reiterated that Robinson was being charged with aggravated murder and that prosecutors had officially filed intent to pursue the death penalty. At first, Robinson sat motionless, staring at the ceiling, his hands trembling slightly. Then the prosecutor began reading the victim targeting enhancement, which stated he had chosen Charlie Kirk because of his beliefs and political expression. That single line broke him. Robinson suddenly slammed his hands on the table, shouting, "No! You don't get to twist God's words!" The courtroom erupted. His attorney tried to calm him, but Robinson shoved his chair back and turned toward the crowd, yelling, "You're all slaves! Every one of you!" Deputies rushed in, pinning him to the ground as he screamed incoherently about corruption, the deep church, and divine mission. Spectators were escorted out as Robinson kicked, spat, and cursed. The judge struck his gavel, shouting, "Order!" but the chaos drowned him out. It took 4 officers to carry Robinson out of the room, still thrashing, still screaming scripture mixed with profanities. What no one realized at the time was that the meltdown had been partially predicted by jail staff days earlier. In an internal memo later leaked to Deseret News, a corrections lieutenant had written, "Inmate Robinson exhibits signs of planned disruption behavior consistent with high-profile case manipulation. He appears aware that his courtroom behavior is being recorded." In other words, he wanted the cameras. The clip of the incident spread instantly, replayed on TikTok, edited into compilations, and even set to dramatic music. Some online users called it proof of possession. Others saw it as a political statement. Hashtags like "There's Robinson Breakdown" and "Justice for Charlie" trended for days. It was exactly the kind of spectacle Robinson's defense team dreaded. In an emergency filing, they requested future hearings to be held privately, arguing that publicity risks further inflaming the defendant's unstable mental condition. But by then, the damage was done. The world had seen him, not as a confused young man, but as a violent extremist, spitting scripture while shouting at judges. And while Robinson was dragged out of that courtroom, Erica Kirk remained seated, trembling. Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder as she whispered, "He's proud of what he did." That quiet statement was later confirmed by the prosecution. One of the guards escorting Robinson back to his holding cell claimed the suspect muttered under his breath, "I'll do it again if they let me." For investigators, it was all they needed. The case was no longer about proving guilt, it was about proving intent. Outside, the protests grew louder. Supporters of Charlie Kirk demanded maximum punishment, while conspiracy theorists flooded online platforms claiming Robinson was a government experiment or false flag actor. Every corner of the internet seemed to be spinning its own version of the truth. Governor Spencer Cox addressed the tension in a press conference, saying,
For 33 hours, I was praying that if this had to happen here, that it wouldn't be one of us. Sadly, that prayer was not answered the way I had hoped for.
That same afternoon, an FBI spokesperson announced that Robinson would undergo additional psychological assessment, but emphasized mental illness does not excuse ideological violence. Behind the scenes, agents uncovered more chilling evidence, a collection of draft emails and deleted videos found on Robinson's laptop. In one draft titled "My Testament," he wrote, "History doesn't remember cowards. It remembers the ones who stood for truth, even when truth bled." That one line, poetic yet horrifying, revealed what prosecutors had been arguing all along. Tyler Robinson didn't snap, he planned. Even as the trial date loomed, the line between madness and manipulation blurred. His defense attorney filed a motion for solitary confinement, claiming other inmates had threatened him, but jail reports contradicted that, suggesting it was Robinson who had been inciting tension, preaching revolution to anyone who'd listen. On one occasion, he told another inmate, "They can kill my body, but not my mission." Officers wrote that down. The prosecution would later read it aloud in court. Every day, it became harder to tell whether Tyler Robinson truly believed he was on a divine mission, or if he was just acting out the final performance of a man who wanted control, even behind bars. And then came the note that changed everything. Late one night, a jail officer found a folded piece of paper wedged under Robinson's mattress. It wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a rant. It was just 3 words: "I miss him." For the first time, investigators wondered if Tyler Robinson was finally breaking, not into rage, but into regret. But even that small sliver of humanity wouldn't last. Within days, Robinson's next outburst would make headlines again, this time involving an officer, a tray of food, and words that would leave everyone asking, was this man insane or just evil? The final breakdown and the death penalty decision. By the time October arrived, the entire nation had already seen Tyler Robinson's first 2 meltdowns, one inside the Utah County courtroom and another during his transfer back to jail when he reportedly tried to bite a deputy. But what no one expected was that he wasn't done, not even close. Within the next few weeks, Robinson's behavior would reach a breaking point. He would assault 2 officers, be placed in full restraints, and scream something so bizarre that even hardened correctional staff described it as the most unsettling moment of their careers. It started innocently enough, or as innocent as things could be for a man facing the death penalty. On October 3rd, Robinson was being escorted from his cell to a routine psychiatric evaluation. He had spent the previous night awake, ranting about the light behind the wall, and insisting that someone kept turning the voices back on. Guards later testified that he seemed exhausted, but eerily calm. When they entered the transfer hallway, one of the deputies loosened his wrist cuffs to adjust them. That's when Robinson turned and slammed his shoulder into the deputy's chest, knocking both men into the wall. In the split second that followed, Robinson grabbed the officer's radio and screamed, "He's not dead! He's coming back!" The hallway erupted. Officers rushed in, slamming Robinson to the ground. The camera footage, later leaked to local media, showed him thrashing and yelling scripture as they pinned his face against the floor. It wasn't an organized attack. It was a complete loss of control. When they finally restrained him, one officer's lip was split open. Another had bruised ribs. Robinson himself was dragged back to solitary confinement, bleeding from the mouth, but still grinning through it all. That video, grainy, low-lit, and horrifying, would leak just days later, spreading across Twitter and YouTube faster than officials could contain it. Clips with captions like "Charlie Kirk's killer goes demonic" and "possessed in jail" racked up millions of views overnight. The narrative wasn't just legal anymore, it had become mythological. Inside the courthouse, however, prosecutors were focused on something far more tangible. They were preparing for the next hearing, a session intended to confirm Robinson's mental evaluation results and establish whether he would stand trial or be declared unfit. But that question, insanity or intent, was no longer easy to answer. The evaluation report, quietly filed by the state's Forensic Psychiatry Division, described Robinson as lucid, aware of his circumstances, but psychologically dissociated through ideological delusion. In plain terms, he knew what he'd done, and he still believed it was right. The report read, "While exhibiting symptoms of religious preoccupation and persecutory beliefs, subject remains capable of understanding the nature and consequences of his actions." That single line would change everything. It meant Robinson was legally sane. It meant the death. Penalty was still on the table. When Robinson appeared in court again on October 15th, extra deputies filled the room. There was no audience this time, no cameras allowed, only court officials, attorneys, and one journalist from Deseret News who would later describe the atmosphere as tense, claustrophobic, and emotionally suffocating. Robinson sat in a padded restraint chair, wrists cuffed, wearing a black spit mask. As the judge read through the findings of his mental assessment, Robinson began to shake his head slowly slowly, muttering beneath the mask. Then came the moment no one forgot. The prosecutor repeated the words of the evaluation, that Robinson understood the consequences of his actions. Robinson suddenly started laughing, not just a chuckle, a deep, guttural laugh that grew louder until it drowned out the judge's voice. The entire courtroom froze. He rocked forward, forcing his chair to tilt slightly, and said through the mesh mask, "Consequences. You think I'm afraid of consequences? You think he was?" Deputies grabbed the chair to stabilize it, but Robinson wasn't done. He screamed, "He asked for this. He asked for it on that stage."
Anything that you say in court today could be used against you, and we want to protect your constitutional rights.
The judge immediately ordered the court cleared. Journalists were escorted out, and the feed from the closed circuit system was cut. But witnesses who remained said Robinson continued yelling, fragments of scripture, followed by what sounded like a sermon about truth being bought and sold. Even the court-appointed psychiatrist, sitting quietly in the back row, later told KSL Utah reporters that it felt less like psychosis and more like performance. After that incident, Robinson was permanently banned from in-person hearings. All future appearances would be remote, conducted through a WebEx video feed from an isolation unit in the Utah State Hospital. But even through the camera, his intensity was impossible to contain. During one hearing, when prosecutors played a recording of his jail rant, Robinson looked straight into the camera and whispered, "They lied about the resurrection too." Court officers described the moment as chilling. One of them said it was like he knew exactly how to make everyone uncomfortable, like he fed off it. And in some ways he did, because while Robinson sat behind bars, his story was spiraling online. His fanatics, a small but loud group of anonymous accounts, started spreading videos claiming Robinson was set up by the state, calling him a patriot, taken down by propaganda. They called themselves the 33, referencing the 33 hours between the assassination and Robinson's arrest. In their forums, they traded theories, altered footage, and even tried to raise money for his legal defense, something his family publicly rejected. "Our son is not a martyr," his mother wrote in a Facebook post. "He's sick, and he ruined countless lives, including his own." But her plea didn't stop the cult from growing. In their minds, Robinson's courtroom rage was proof that he was speaking truth to power. Behind the scenes, prosecutors were preparing for one last pre-trial motion, the formal confirmation that they would seek capital punishment. Their argument was simple. This wasn't a man overcome by illness, but one consumed by ideology. And that ideology had metastasized into a public act of terror meant to silence a voice he hated. The defense countered by introducing old journal entries from Robinson's college years, ramblings about paranoia, divine judgment, and loneliness. They tried to show a portrait of a lost soul spiraling under digital manipulation, but the judge wasn't swayed. "Ideology is not illness," he said. "Belief does not excuse bloodshed." And with that, Robinson's fate was sealed. Still, even as the legal machinery rolled forward, one mystery lingered. Why Charlie Kirk? There were thousands of political figures more famous, more controversial, more outspoken. But for Robinson, Kirk represented something deeply personal. The man who had, in his words, betrayed the crusade. During the investigation, FBI analysts discovered that Robinson had attended 2 Turning Point USA events in the past year. In one, he asked Kirk a question about faith and government that went unanswered. In another, he had been turned away at the door for refusing to go through security screening. According to court documents, that rejection was the tipping point. He had written afterward, "He doesn't protect the message, he protects the brand. If God won't judge him, I will." Those words would become his confession, not shouted in anger, but written in private, in the same journal that was found beneath his mattress after the shooting. The case dragged on for months. Robinson's outbursts became less frequent but more disturbing. Once, during a video hearing, he appeared with a self-inflicted bruise under his eye and told the judge, "Charlie came last night. He told me I'm still right." Prosecutors argued that every statement like that was deliberate, a manipulative act to blur the line between sanity and insanity. Psychologists disagreed. They said it was a symptom of a man consumed by guilt he refused to acknowledge. Either way, the outcome was inevitable. In a final pre-trial hearing held in December, the judge confirmed that jury selection for the death penalty trial would begin in early 2026. Robinson didn't react. He sat silent, eyes fixed on the screen. When the judge asked if he understood, he nodded once. Then, before the feed cut off, he said something that left the courtroom frozen. "I already died when he did." The audio fell silent. The camera went dark, and for the first time in months, there were no screams, no thrashing, just silence. Outside the courthouse, protesters stood in the freezing Utah air, holding 2 kinds of signs: justice for Charlie and pray for Tyler. It was a snapshot of a country that couldn't decide decide who to hate, who to forgive, or how to heal. And as America argued over politics, faith, and free speech, one truth remained undeniable. A single gunshot on a college campus had become the spark for yet another national reckoning. Because in the end, it wasn't just a bullet that killed Charlie Kirk. It was the ideology that made it seem righteous. And for Tyler James Robinson, whose courtroom rampages, jail fights, and cryptic words turned tragedy into spectacle, there was nothing left but the echo of his own madness, trapped inside a cell, convinced he was still saving the world. If you enjoyed watching this video, then go ahead and click on any of the cards on your screen for more.